Welcome ladies and gents, Chris Andre here. You can find me at BetBoxing on Twitter, or of course you can subscribe to the channel Let's Talk Boxing. There's been some breaking news regarding Tyson Fury, so we're going to get to that in a moment. At the end of this little segment where I'm talking alone, I will attach part 4 of my discussion with Steve Kim, and we talk about the heavyweight division. We discuss Deontay Wilder and a potential of him fighting Alexander Usyk. How realistic is that? Bear in mind, Steve Kim is a boxing insider, so check that out. We're also going to talk about Tyson Fury and his career and what's going on with him at the moment and how he sees himself and his CV and things like that. And we'll also talk about Saudi investment and minimum guarantees that are being put into contracts and how that is affecting fights being made. But for you guys to be able to really be brought up to date, because that was done last Tuesday, that was recorded. Because of that, I have to introduce this little breaking news for it to make sense and to bring everything into context. And that is that Opetaia, the current IBF Cruiserweight Champion of the world, is, according to his promoter, in line to fight Tyson Fury next. It has all but been signed, basically. They've agreed the fight's going to be made according to the promoter. Having said that, there's also been rumours that Tyson Fury would be fighting Demsey. Now, the Opetaia fight, I absolutely love, and we'll come to that in a moment. In terms of Demsey, he's a big heavyweight, nicknamed the Tower, 6'6". He stopped Jonathan Rice, which is a very respectable display. Jonathan Rice is a very high-level journeyman who can test a lot of guys. You know, he's one of those that will be almost a gatekeeper in some ways. Michael Coffey was considered a real prospect coming out of the United States, and he got stopped by him, and they had a rematch. Coffey was supposedly underestimating hhim, and he beat him again. And then he fought Guido Vianello, Jonathan Rice, and he stopped him in his last outing too. And Guido was another one who was 10-0 Italian prospect. Prior to that, he'd been the distance against big punching Efe Ajagba. So McKean stopping him in the 10th round really is a good display. It's a good result. The only guy that's done better against Jonathan Rice is Arslanbek Makhmudov. If we're talking about records, who's done better, he stopped him in 7. But he'd been the distance in the past with the likes of Tony Yoka and Stephen Shaw. They were 6-round fights though. But the point is, he's given a good account of himself here, Demsey, and he was due to fight Anthony Joshua. I think they probably picked Franklin instead of McKean because he might be less of a threat in terms of a knockout, and AJ's lacking confidence at the moment. Franklin's not as big, he's not as athletic as McKean, but he's a better technical fighter than Demsey. So it depends what you're looking for, but he's that sort of level. No great shakes, but he's a southpaw. So you're sitting there and you're looking at it, you're saying, okay, this could be preparation for Alexander Usyk, but really I expect Tyson Fury to come through that. Opetaia, though, is a different kettle of fish. The IBF Cruiserweight Champion is a brilliant boxer puncher. The way he operates reminds me a little bit of Dimitri Bivol. This is something that I'd said in the preview to the Maris Briedis fight. He is, though, a southpaw, but I'm talking about being on the balls of his feet, edge of the pocket, and can bounce in and out with long, straight combinations, and he can pop up a little bit. 17 knockouts out of 22 fights. And if you look historically, I've always felt that the kryptonite of Tyson Fury, and other analysts have felt this too, Hatman, is cruiserweights or smaller heavyweights that are mobile. They're the ones that tend to give Fury some problems. Cunningham dropped him, for instance. There were sparring rumours that Michael Hunter gave him all that he could handle. Otto Wallin is a heavyweight rather than a cruiserweight because he's so tall. But the way he moves, he's not a broad heavyweight. He moves and basically fights a bit more like a cruiserweight. And he too is a southpaw, and he gave some issues to Tyson Fury. So this is a style of fighter that could really give Fury some problems. And the reason I love the fight is because he's a legitimate threat potentially to Fury, but he's also great preparation for Alexander Usyk if Fury comes through it, which suggests to us Fury might actually be serious about making a Usyk fight. So this is why I really like this if it was to play out. In the build up to the Briedis fight, it was really difficult for me to find footage of Opetaia, and I ended up finding sort of like extended highlights, footage in the gym and things like that. And I was saying, look, I'm picking Briedis, who was top 15 pound for pound back then, but it's a tentative pick because it could be a real breakout fight for Opetaia because he's got all the tools to dethrone Maris Briedis. But there were too many question marks. What's his heart going to be like and stuff like that? Well, he got his jaw broken by Briedis, and he still went on to win the fight fairly convincingly. I believe I had it 8-4, like 2 of the judges had it, one of them had it 7-5. So he was a legitimate victor over Maris Briedis, and he's arguably the best cruiserweight in the world today. So it's a real test for Fury, stylistically speaking, and one that I would love to see. Let me know what you think about these fights. Let's now get into my discussion with Steve Kim. there has been a rumor reported that if Dubois is not able to fight Alexander Usyk, he has had this issue, this injury with his leg, then the WBA would order Deontay Wilder to step in his place. With the rumors of this fight happening in Saudi Arabia between AJ and Wilder, and fingers crossed between Fury and Usyk, what are the chances really of either Wilder or Usyk wanting to take that fight before such a tournament? Was it too much of a risk in terms of leaving money on the table?
Yeah, I don't even know what to believe as it relates right now to the heavyweight division. Here's the issue with that fight. If you do Usyk Wilder, if you did a traditional purse bid and the name brand promoters that we all know of put in bids for that fight, I don't know, based on whatever that percentage split would be ruled by, because those things can fluctuate, would satisfy either side. Now, if you got Middle East oil money and that conglomerate that says, okay, we're putting up 60 million, even though in the real world it's only worth 20, well, at that point, maybe all bets are off. You know, I'm kind of fascinated by what's going on here. I'm really surprised that Joe Joyce activated his rematch clause. And because I was told that Zhang Zhilei was actually in the running for Tyson Fury, a fight that I would really like to see. So seeing is believing. And I don't know if Deontay Wilder, let's say the WBA, which is heavily aligned with the PBC, says it's a 60-40 or 65-35 split. Would Deontay Wilder and his management be willing to be the B-side to that degree in any purse bid? You have to think about that, because sometimes a fighter kind of sees the writing on the wall and they're like, you know what, we're not going to do this. And they pull themselves out. That's happening more and more, actually. So, boy, I don't know what's going on there. And that's what I kind of worry about the whole Middle East thing. It seems to cloud the picture and give fighters this delusion of grandeur of what they're actually worth, instead of just saying, you know what, let's just fight the fight for what it's worth and move on. So I think this is where we have to be a little bit careful about just using the Middle East as some sort of economic stimulus to make all the fights that we want to occur.
And we're seeing, as you're saying, the potential domino effect of that, because Tyson Fury's promoter, Frank Warren, has said that the Andy Ruiz fight will not be taking place due to, and I quote, Andy Ruiz's financial demands. Now, he hasn't released any figures or anything like that. Rick Glazer has actually said that the blame lies at the door of Al Heyman and Andy Ruiz in terms of their demands, but we just don't know what the figures are. And it could literally be a case of Tyson Fury has all these options from Saudi Arabia. He's looking at himself as a massive A-side compared to Andy Ruiz, even though it would be a legacy fight, another fight which adds to the legacy of Fury should he win it. And so are we seeing the damaging knock-on effect of this? I mean, where does Fury go from here? Who does he fight at this stage?
You know, the Fury thing's interesting. I certainly respect him as a fighter with a high boxing IQ, rare athleticism for his size, and a certain acumen inside that ring. But we have to be honest about his run as a heavyweight champion, going all the way back to when he beat Klitschko, took 2.5 years off. To me, I don't think you keep the lineage. And then he threatened to retire. Then he kind of retired in Ring Magazine, vacated the belt. Then he got upset when he came back. And I'm thinking, well, based on your track record, how else can this be? I know a lot of people say he's already a top 10 heavyweight. My view is I don't think his resume or his consistency really merits that at this time. I know the pandemic and the situation with Wilder kind of jammed him up a little bit, but I'd like to see him go on a run here of about 3-4 years where he fights everybody. And it's not happening. And I just wonder, does Tyson Fury just want every single fight now to be in the Middle East for hundreds of dollars, or he's not going to fight? Last year, I understood what he did. Made some money. He actually fought twice for the first time in about 3-4 years. British rivalries. Had to take care of a mandatory. I got it. But once that is cleared, I was hoping for some more meaningful fights, and I was really disappointed that the Usyk fight could not come off in the first half of this year. I think a lot of this is conjecture. I don't know what happens with Fury, to be honest with you. I don't even think Fury's people, because I get the sense that Fury has become increasingly more difficult to deal with the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, you see, with me, I do consider Tyson Fury to be a superb heavyweight by any standard in any era, but that's a very subjective position from the point of me trying to do my own tactical analysis and technical analysis. When it comes to his resume, when he calls himself the best of all time, it's well short of that. And so you want to see him, as you're saying, go on a run fighting the top guys. And if we look at his history, he hasn't always been risk averse. I mean, if you look at the 4 biggest fights of his career, Klitschko, Wilder 3 times, they were all on away soil. Yeah. The Wilder fight did come when he was out in terrible shape. He had to lose 100 pounds. He was in terrible shape, and he took that risk when a lot of people were saying that AJ and Wilder weren't willing to take the risk to fight each other. He has fought Dillian White, which, you know, Ring Magazine had him in that sort of year at number 4 and then at number 6 heavyweight. So that is a legitimate test as well. But then something's happened whereby he doesn't seem to be willing to take those risks. And that change has coincided, as you're saying, with this injection from the Middle East. And whilst I don't want to undermine them for being willing to spend money on boxing, it has created an effect that perhaps the PBC also created when they first came onto the scene, where they're overpaying fighters, which then makes fighters unwilling to fight for less money. It creates an inflated...
And Chris, to be fair, when the Zone and Matchroom came into existence in 2018 with their war chest, they also disrupted the market. But this is human nature. If you are a fighter, not just Tyson Fury, or any other fighter that goes to the Middle East, and you get this exorbitant payday, or let's say a fight that's generally worth $2.5 to $3 million, and you're getting paid 20, I've talked to managers about this, to get that same fighter to only fight for now $3 million again, right? It becomes difficult because the fighters now today are conditioned, and a lot of this has to do with the way the promotional contracts are set up with fighters and the companies, that there's a minimum base salary that they get for every fight, whether they fight you, me, King Kong, or Godzilla. And that's why a lot of them cannot fight more than twice a year. They're not willing to bend off that minimum, and the yearly budget may not be available for another fight. And I've always said fighters are now underexposed. They simply do not do their jobs. But that's the whole thing. A lot of fighters and their management will tell the promoters, no matter who they fight next, we're not going backwards on the money. And to me, that makes no sense, because back when boxing was truly a business and a sport, it really depended on who you fought and the financial projections of that fight. And let me give you an example. In 1997, I did a story on this. I spoke to both Oscar De La Hoya and Bob Arum. Oscar De La Hoya, coming off that victory over Julio Cesar Chavez, was the biggest name in the sport. In 1997, he fought 5 times. That's unheard of. It'll never be done again at that level. And both Bob and Oscar, they revealed to me that every fight, when they went to negotiate, they did not have a minimum. They actually just projected what the fight would do on pay-per-view, at the gate, what kind of sight fee they can get, international. And so they started at ground zero. A lot of these contracts now state XYZ fighter has to get XYZ money regardless of the opponent. And I think that's one of the things that's very problematic in the modern day business is, if you do not actually put that clause in, here's the problem, Chris. Some other promoter will guarantee a minimum amount, and it makes it impossible to sign fighters to do it the old way.
Exactly. And, you know, to use an analogy here, because I do sort of understand how this process takes place. If you've been a waiter and you're working at a fast food chain and you're on $10 an hour, and then suddenly somebody offers you $20 an hour for the same sort of job, it is hard to then finish that contract and say, I'm going to go back to 10. But you have to understand, if this new food establishment is some Michelin star, gourmet, high-end restaurant, they're going to pay more. And so it's often about the demand for the product, but the fighters, like you're saying, don't seem to want to do that, which I understand from, you know, I understand it. But then, like you're saying, somebody will come in and say, I will guarantee you this, and it just inflates the market. But Steve, is it sustainable? Can boxing continue?
No, I don't know how look, boxing will never die. Larry Merchant once said it best: nothing's going to kill it, nothing's going to save it. But I do wonder about its overall ability to grow the next generation of stars. Now, look, Tank Davis is a star. He's one of the faces of boxing, and they've hit upon something. But I have a question for young guys like Shakur Stevenson, who I believe is a brilliant boxer. I don't know if anyone beats him for the next 10 years. But he doesn't even have 20 fights. He's in his mid-20s, and he's already becoming a twice-a-year fighter. I don't know how much how do you become someone that transcends the hardcore boxing base if only the hardcore denizens of the sport are watching. I have a theory that for all fighters, until you hit maybe your late 20s or at least 30 to 35 fights, if you only fight twice a year before that and you're relegated to that schedule, you will never be anything more than just a boxer that only boxing fans know. Now, there are some anomalies like De La Hoya and Ray Leonard because they had the Olympic parachute or that launching pad. But when you look at a guy like Canelo Alvarez, I have so much respect for him. He's going to be close to 70 fights by the time he hangs them up. We will not see that again, Chris. We won't. Just look at the way these schedules are now laid out. These careers won't even be 40 fights. There's going to be a lot of 35 to 39 fight careers based on the fact that this is a particular pattern. A very good young fighter will win a title by a 16th or 18th fight. The high minimums kick in. And at that point, the promoter says, okay, you're going twice a year, unless you're a pay-per-view guy, and then maybe you can create your own date. But again, all of these things that happen, Chris, they never happen rapidly. It's what I call the slow erosion. And if you look at the top 10 Ring Magazine pound for pound right now, I looked at it about a month and a half, 2 months ago. Half of these guys had only fought once or had not fought at all in 2023. That's alarming to me.
I agree, and it's highly unusual if you consider those top 10 pound for pound fighters, they are the assets of the sport. If you need to sell the sport, they are the ones that need to be front and center. So when they're not being sold to the masses,
right,
it's just a terrible business model.